love to welcome our Fireside Chat. We have Daniella Senior, founder and CEO of the Colada Shop, who's also whose food we are eating and partaking in today. We also have Khari Parker, who is going to join us as well. Come on up. Hi. Thank you so much. I should go that way. Khari, thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining me on stage. It's always, I feel like, the policy conversations are so important, but actually talking to the small business owners and kind of seeing it brought into action and the efforts that you all are doing for your own businesses, but as well as kind of speaking on Capitol Hill is so important. I want to thank you both for joining me. And we're going to start with you, Daniella. I'd like you to just start first. Thank you for providing the food this morning. I'm excited to try some after I'm off stage. You are the founder and CEO of Colada Shop. You recently opened your 7th location in the DMV. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit about your story and the growth you've had since launching in 2016.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm an immigrant from Dominican Republic originally, and I started my first business when I was 13 years old out of my kitchen. And I started baking and kept that business all the way through I was 18 years old. I saved up money to be able to fulfill my dream, which at the time was to go to culinary school in New York. Obviously with also additional support from my parents, and I was able to do that, and which was obviously an amazing opportunity, and then had also the privilege of working with amazing people like Chef Jose Andres here in DC, and then I wanted to go back to being an entrepreneur. Like, I felt I was always in my blood, and I felt a need to ultimately share part of my heritage, part of my culture. I was I guess classically trained French chef, then moved towards operations, but it really felt important to share my culture, share my heritage, and uplift others along the way. I was in the nation's capital, and I saw Latino food portrayed in a lot of hole in the walls, which were delicious, by the way. But also I felt, are these businesses actually thriving, right? I saw what was a lot of families working within these businesses and not really ultimately paying themselves very little, by the way, just to keep the doors open and, make it a family affair. But not really having a lot of opportunities to really keep going. And I kind of really wanted to change that narrative. I wanted to share the food, the colors, the coffee, the vibrancy. That's why so Colada Shop is an all-day Cuban cafe. Part of my heritage is Cuban, and it's super vibrant. You have the music. It's beautiful spaces. Hope you enjoy the food, and we have amazing cocktails as well. But it's not only what you're going in for a product. It's like who we're supporting along the way, who we're putting in our leadership teams along the way. It's minorities, it's a lot of women, it's immigrants that are sustaining a lot of our workforce and are not being overlooked a lot of the times when it comes to growth. And that has been ultimately my driving force to keep going, against all odds, quite honestly, because getting to 7 locations for a small business in this space is no small task. Not to pat myself in the back, but it's actually very difficult. Getting funding for small businesses is incredibly difficult. Only 2% of the funding out there goes to women. And then you put a minority woman on top of that, it's like we're talking a tiny fraction. So, there have been a lot of obstacles, but seeing how I am able to support my community in opening more businesses and taking the risk, and they're ultimately then supporting me back is, I guess, how I've gotten here. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Khari, you are co-founder of Connie's Chicken and Waffles. Tell us about your business, how it got started, kind of your journey.
Absolutely. And thank you for having us. Good morning, everyone. Very similar to listening to Daniella, that's kind of like our story as well. So I'll tell you, we started back in 2016. It was my brother and I. You know, he had a career in contract management. I was IT. But we always had the burdening within our heart, like we should be doing something a little bit more to help our community. You know, we grew up in Baltimore City. It wasn't always easy. So when we started our business, we started 2016, Connie's Chicken and Waffles. We named it after our mom, affectionately known as Miss Connie. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that we can share love with from our team members to folks within our community as well. And the idea is based on the premise that everyone has value. So everyone has a skill. Like everyone may not be the best cashier, but they can cook, or vice versa. So we kind of took that simple concept, expanded out within Baltimore, 3 locations. At one point, we had a location in Southern Florida. At one point, in Wilmington, Delaware. But the whole idea is to get into communities, get talent, get folks involved, activate the community, give amazing customer service, and really deliver chicken and waffles. We're so much more than just chicken and waffles as well. But that's the core component of what we do.
Well, Khari, you also serve as a member of Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Voices National Leadership Council. Talk about that role. What does it entail? What has the Voices community been focused on recently?
Absolutely. First, let me start off with the 10KSB program in general. So, you know, we started back in 2010, the program started. It has over 16,000 entrepreneurs and business owners right now. So Voices is the legislative advocacy component of the program. And the idea is that a lot of time as business owners, we operate in silos. Like, being a business owner can be a very lonely thing because you don't necessarily have coworkers. You have customers, you may have team members, but you don't often have coworkers. So the idea is that if we come together as a collective force, we can advocate around policy at the local, state, and also federal level. So the best thing I like about the Voices program is the unique ways that we engage policymakers. So we're a nonpartisan organization, and we really push for bipartisan adjustments to legislation. So to give you one example, more recently, we had a billboard in Times Square, and it was aimed at the ABC moderators to encourage them, for when the debates come up, to encourage small business topics to be relevant and to be kind of brought to the forefront. So that was a really fun thing. When I think back, another thing that we did as a collective group is the Wall Street Journal. We had an open letter sent. 3,000 of our members, alumni, actually participated and signed this letter, and it was aimed at the Federal Reserve to help change up the Basel III endgame legislation. And for folks that don't know, so Basel III is pretty much risk management financial regulations that are put in place to help protect banks, which sounds good on one hand, right? But the flip side is that banks need to circulate money by lending it out to entrepreneurs, small business owners. If it's not being lended out or loaned out, the problem that we face is that there's less access to capital. So one thing we talk with the governors at the Federal Reserve about is, hey, can you make amendments such that more of this capital can free flow to small business owners across America who need it the most?
I feel like you can go up to Capitol Hill right now better than a lot of paid corporate lobbyists on that issue. You explained it very concisely. I'm impressed. Daniella, we've been talking to small business owners over the past year, and certainly in the surveys that Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses does, the issue of childcare comes up all the time. We heard it was one of the top 3 issues that Senator Shaheen kind of brought up as something that she's concerned about. Talk about what you've seen with childcare and why it's so important, and the implications that there are for small businesses when it comes to when affordable childcare isn't available.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that only 3 weeks ago, the Surgeon General actually put an advisory out there for parenting. Like, that's how bad it is. You know, it's really a crisis right now in this country. And it particularly, I would say, affects small businesses because it affects our workforce significantly. So, it affects the people that we can attract. We do not have the same means and possibilities as larger corporations or tax credits, for that matter, that are able to allow us to, you know, support better our teams with childcare. You know, I saw it firsthand during the pandemic, right? We had over 2 million women that exited that workforce at that time, simply for the fact that they did not have anyone to take care of their kids. And it was, to me, actually very divided, right? It did not affect equally men and women, you know, and we go back to how women are not advancing as much in the workforce, and the pay inequalities and so forth. And to me, childcare is at the center of that, because they have to make the decision. Do I work to literally pay for childcare? And in DC, in this area, actually DMV, we have the most expensive childcare of the entire nation. And it actually is up to 93% of a single mother's income. So let's, if obviously you have a spouse and you have that ability, you're like, well, do I go to work and literally put 93% of my income into having someone else take care of my child, or do I stay home? And what that does ultimately is that it takes women out of the workforce up to 5 years, off for 5 years. 5 years is a long time. Quite frankly, how quickly things move right now, you're pretty much obsolete, or you're in a severe disadvantage, right? When you decide that you want to go back. And why 5 years? Because 5 years, and it depends on the state. I would say DC in that regards is more friendly. You have childcare starting at 3. And Virginia, where I live actually, you don't have anything till 5, right? So it's it depends on the particular state, but it's, that's how long it takes for you to be able to be like, okay, I have reliable childcare. And industries like hospitality, where, we eat all day, right? We love going out to dinner, but childcare stops at 6 p.m., right? So we're particularly hit with that challenge, right? And who we can keep in our workforce and support my team. So it was a combination that was of things that happened, but to me, even before I was a mother, during the pandemic, that was like, this needs to be addressed. And yes, I can speak very loudly about it, but we need policy change. And this is very much a bipartisan issue. It's not, Democrats or Republicans. This is affecting absolutely everyone. But, we cannot attract talent or keep talent. In industries in the food sector, we tend to also employ women of childbearing age, right? So you kind of get into they might start younger, and then they transition into motherhood or parenthood, because it's both. It's not only mothers, it's actually equally affecting dads as well. It's just, so it's how are we able to support our teams so they can stay? We've spent so much time and resources training them. We want to keep them. We don't want to be like, oh, now I became a parent and I can't come to work anymore. I want to be able to offer paid leave and be able to, again, have access for them for affordable childcare.
All right, we are quickly running out of time, but I want to get to 2 last questions here before we get the hook, and we have our second senator join us on stage. But I'm going to ask you both, and I'll start with you, Khari. I want you to talk, you're obviously a good ambassador of the program. You're an alum, both of you, of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses Program. Why is it important? There's a lot of alumni here. Why is it important to get involved and talk to lawmakers, and what's one thing you think they could do to help small businesses? I'll start with you, Khari.
That's an amazing question. And I'll tell you, it's so important to talk to lawmakers because, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of operate in silos sometimes. Yeah. So when we can talk to lawmakers, they're not flying in the blind. A lot of lawmakers, they may have experience in entrepreneurship, but, a lot of times at this point in time, we're feet on the ground, boots on the ground.
Right.
So I'd say just being able to get our points across collectively, it just means so much.
I would say for me, it's honestly tax incentives, right? We mentioned it earlier, the statistics is 50% of, America's workforce is small businesses, yet small businesses have no tax incentives, right? So we are at a major disadvantage, and we are actually putting that money back into our communities, investing in our communities, uplifting our communities. So we should definitely partake in that. Yeah.
All right, we heard it here. Again, this is going to be the last question for you. We have a lot of advocates, we have lawmakers, staff watching here on the live stream as well as in person. What's the one thing you want them to take away from this conversation? Khari, I'll start with you.
And I'll be brief because I could talk about this all day long. I'd say access to affordable capital, and an emphasis on the word affordable. So there's access to capital nowadays, but I think some things are almost on the line of usury. You know, like we're talking 30% rates sometimes being offered to small business owners. And the gist of why capital means so much to small business owners, because think about it this way. Every single day you're going in making a new investment on a conceptual level, right? You know, you gather your team, your resources, you gather your customers, and you know, you hope the customers purchase the product or service, but you need an initial investment to pretty much roll over every single day. When you have access to capital, it allows you to keep that engine running. You can expand as needed when opportunities come up. You can keep your payroll going. It's just so much that's involved with access to capital. So I think, you know, that's probably the biggest point I would make, that I think legislators and policymakers should really look into ways to ways to expand access to affordable capital.
All right.
I'm gonna have to go with him, and I'll emphasize it also, you know, on the women and minorities piece, just because again, even the access to capital is very challenging, but again, it's just very, very limiting, and the percentage is, again, kind of mind-blowing, where we talk 2% going to them. So, like you said, I think we need to support our small businesses, and without capital, we cannot succeed, and that is the main reason why most small businesses fail, is from ultimately that lack of sufficient funding to get off the ground.
All right, Daniella, Khari, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on stage. We really appreciate it. Give her a hand. Thank you so much.